All right. Well, good morning and welcome. I think what we'll do is we'll just get started here on this Thursday. Hopefully, we're having a good start to our day, and here it is. We're on the eve of returning back to the hybrid model, or how we know learning as is going to go through a little shift. All right. So, how are we feeling about this idea of shifting? Feel free to put into the chat or unmute. It's okay. We can talk about it.
I'm excited.
Here we are excited. Okay. What makes you excited?
I just get to finally be back at the actual school for once.
Okay.
And just see some familiar faces.
Okay. All right. There's a lot of good questions here. All right. So why is the class shorter on Friday? That's just simply because it was Flex Friday, the way it was under the previous hybrid model. So I would anticipate that's why Friday is a little shorter. Don't know quite understand the rationale, but into why the minutes are shorter than if it was a Monday through Thursday, where you have the 75 minutes and stuff like that. So perhaps they're just looking at it as more of a catch-up time period. So I don't really know the inner workings of their thought on the 45-minute versus the 75-minute completely. So, but I understand your point there. The adjusting of the schedules and all that stuff, I understand, the going back and forth between the modes and all that stuff. I definitely will test our patience and our sense of resiliency, and as well as our level of tolerance. Okay, all good points. Anyone else? It's very well possible that we're just still thinking of what this all looks like, or it's just setting in that next Tuesday it's going to a different mode. Okay. I will say, when we shifted from hybrid to distant learning, I still came in every day just for that routine, sitting in my classroom and teaching. And so I've stayed in that routine. So for me, the adjustment will be seamless. For my wife, teaching from home, that will be a bigger adjustment as well. And the shift also will be an adjustment for my daughter as well, who's a senior. So she knows exactly what you're going through as well. Okay. So always, if you have concerns or if you just want to share some thoughts and things like that, you can always reach out to me or to any of your other teachers, to counselors, to each of your classmates as well, and just talk about it as we make this shift. Okay. And so as you can see, the agenda for today is right there in front of us. I just want to review again the expectations for hybrid learning, which is different than the hybrid learning in the fall. I want to continue with my notes that I started yesterday. Yesterday was on Hitler's War. Today will be on Japan, and then work on the assignment, Road to the Second World War, which yesterday you should have looked at the events that were focused on Germany and for Germany's allies in Europe and the outbreak of the war there. And then today The Second World War is going to focus on Japan. All right. Ultimately, this assignment is due tomorrow, February 12th, and introduce the total war activity for the Second World War, something that to work on over the weekend, but then also we'll have Tuesday and Wednesday to work on it as well. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday to work on it as well. So we've got a few days to work on it. It's going to be very similar to the First World War. So that's really what our agenda looks like for today. All right. So just to review again, you know, our or my expectations for hybrid learning, and may be different than your other teachers, or it could be very similar to what your other teachers are doing. And again, we're talking about synchronous learning. We're gonna be in this mode that we have been in distant learning synchronously. We're just going to continue that into the hybrid, where whether you're an A, a B, or a VLA student, we're just going to be in this mode. The class is going to be taught live Monday through Friday. That includes Flex Fridays. Just means I got to be a little bit more terse and to the point and concise on Fridays, because as Drew has pointed out, that we got less time on Flex Fridays for class time. And so Flex Fridays, those are instructional days. I'm going to use them as instructional days, not optional. So instruction is going to be 5 days a week. Everyone needs to be part of the process. If you're going to be absent, you're going to want to make sure that the office knows that you are going to be absent. I will mark you absent if you're not attending the live Google Meet. So it's just like during distant learning. If you're absent, please watch the recording of the class sessions. I do that daily. I think I've been diligent to get most of them. I might have forgot a couple times, but I think overall, I've been on top of doing the class sessions, recording them. And always come during office hours. I don't get a lot of people there, but you know, pop on in and ask questions, get some clarity at that point. Okay. And then our schedule, as yesterday, went over it in class, and hopefully your other teachers went over the schedule as well. And hopefully I've got the right hours and times for each of the hours as well there. So for us on Monday through Thursday, class starts at 8:30. On Friday, class will start at 9. So you want to be aware of that. Okay. So is there anything that needs to get clarified with that? Okay. So yesterday, the focus was on Hitler's war, and I was making a claim that the war in Europe that breaks out is a result of Adolf Hitler and this idea of having a master plan. And the master plan could have been created all the way back to his days in the early phases of the creation of the Nazi Party with the 25-point program. And then you have Mein Kampf, and then several of his speeches after he gets out of prison. We'll give some insight as well. All that is adding to his framework of his foreign policy. And realistically, his foreign policy is looking at expanding Germany's influence in Europe, create this idea of Lebensraum, restoring Germany to what it had looked like under the Kaisers. And so there is this expansionist idea that goes with his foreign policy. And then there's a race element that is brought into it. And so your activity was to look at how does he bring Germany into a war. And once he becomes chancellor in 1933, you can see those different steps. He is working towards that endeavor that ultimately, with the invasion of Poland, brings on the war. Today, I want to look at Japan. Japan is becoming very aggressive in the Asia-Pacific area. And Japan has been on the move realistically since the mid part of the 19th century as it begins to transform. In the First World War, it was an ally to the United States as well as to the other allied powers. But between the First World War and the start of the Second World War, that relationship is going to get tense. And the second part of that activity really focuses on that. Okay. So I do have a copy of these notes, and you can find them in Schoology. And Schoology, I don't know if it's 100% working today. There has been some glitches with it. And so if you're having problems with Schoology, just someone put it in the chat. Let me know that Schoology is not working so well. But you can find a copy of these notes in there. And again, you don't necessarily have to take these notes down. You can just sit back and listen, or jot down your own notes, whatever works for you. All right, we'll leave it at that. So a historian here has a view of Japan by the 1930s here. Japanese ruling circles in the 1930s were united in their view that the Japanese power and future prosperity rested on carving out a similar to the Western European powers empires, are for themselves in Asia, reproducing in the Far East what they saw as the dominant features of the Western international behavior. So if we look at a takeaway here, Japan is engaging in the same type of activity that the Western powers had done in the 19th century. You may have remembered the carving up of China. Japan, late in the game, is also doing that to China, but then also to other parts in Asia. And they realize that they think that to be a modernized, industrialized nation, they need to engage in empire building. In the 1930s, we're going to call that the co-prosperity sphere, in which it's under this idea that everyone in Asia is going to prosper because an Asian country is going to, in some ways, be kind of like the facilitator here, and the Western powers are going to be pushed out. But in reality, in this co-prosperity sphere that's going to be created, it's mainly for the benefit of Japan, because Japan is a country that doesn't have a lot of mineral resources. And so imperialism, colonial building, annexing, whatever terms you want to say about expansion, that is going to be the mode that's going to get them there. So when we look at what is going to take Japan to that point of a warlike stance, to eventually bring it to at odds with Western powers, we have to take a look at what is happening inside Japan between the mid part of the 19th century to that up to the 1930s. And so in Japan, we do see a rise in militarism in the 19th century. And many could say that Japan has always had a very strong military tradition, something that you probably remember from world history. And this is the era of the shoguns and shogunates. So they've had a strong military tradition. And in 1868, they had a change, one could say a transformation of the Japanese government under the Meiji Restoration. And they started picking elements of the past and attaching it to this new direction under the Meiji government here. And the Samurai Code is going to be part of it. And the Samurai Code is going to be transferred simply to this new modernized nation where you have loyalty until death to the emperor and to the state. So the emperor is still very, very important symbolically in many ways, but also the idea of a modern state going on. Modernization of the expansion of the national armed forces is occurring here. So it is becoming more westernized, one could say. Western influence and military practice, which also means compulsory military service is going to be happening here as well. And so then you got this culture of militarism that is going to emerge. And what's going to reinforce this new culture of militarism, of course, is going to be reinforced in the school system. The curriculum is going to pick and choose various aspects of the military past and prop it up. It's going to dominate the political institutions. The samurais themselves, the old samurais, are going to become the bureaucrats here. So this militarism is emerging in this new Japan here. Also, to go along with it is a new sense of nationalism, and an ideology is being developed. And nationalists began to associate the expansion of Japan with the greater glory of the emperor, who they view as like God. So this strong sense of nationalism of what they are doing with this expansion, they can in some way say this is only making us strong, but also it is a way to honor the emperor. And so they begin to expand their territory after 1874. And this is going to represent the emergence of a new industrial military power. And so they do move into the Asia Pacific area, so like Formosa. And can someone tell me another name for Formosa? Does anyone know another name for Formosa? And they annex Formosa in 1895. They take over Korea, the Korean Peninsula in 1910. They also had a war with Russia, the Russo-Japanese War, 1904 to 1905. So this expansion is becoming big. So does anyone figure out Formosa? It's a big pain in the rear end for China today.
Does it look like a teardrop?
Look like a teardrop. Yeah, it's a good point. All right.
Oh, is that Taiwan then?
That's Taiwan. Yes, yeah. That is Taiwan. It's kind of strange, but I remember seeing items in my grandparents' home that said "Made in Formosa," and I'm like, wow, okay. One that tells a little bit how old I am, and really tells you how old my grandparents were at the time as well. But Formosa. There were patriotic associations which set up traditional culture as superior to Western culture. And so this idea of the ideology as well. And there's a race element to it. And so throughout Japan, you'll find these little patriot groups, these associations. And you could find them also in other countries as well. In our own United States, one of our patriotic associations that popped up was the American Legion group after the First World War. And so you can find patriotic associations in other countries as well. And in many cases, not only in Japan, but in other countries, these patriotic associations are in some ways reflecting what they think is what the culture should be. And so there's a strong element of racial superiority, and that's going to be reinforced in the schools, just like militarism as well. And when we look at this ideology, it's extremely ultra-nationalistic. It's very anti-Western in nature, which does resonate with the people of Japan, but also it resonates with the military. So we're going to see that the military is going to become fairly radicalized at this time, or become very reactionary. Depends on what view that you want to take here. Economic pressure is probably one of the big motivators here for Japan in what they're doing. Like I said, that Japan has a shortage of essential raw materials for modern technology and military. And so because of that, it's going to be their motives for expansion. If they're going to become a modernized nation to compete with Western powers, they need to get these raw materials. And so that becomes the motivator. And something, I don't know if I've used it before, but this idea of autarky. Same thing what Germany is trying to do is, as they're expanding, create a sense of autarky for their economy, which means self-sufficiency, I should say that. Japan is also trying to create a sense of self-sufficiency. However, the economy that Japan has is really not on the same scale at this time of the United States and of some of the European powers. So it's going to be very difficult to create this sense of autarky. So early on, they do take over Manchuria, which is in China, and it's a mineral rich region. And I guess I will refer to them as reactionary. I shouldn't say radical, but reactionary military take it upon themselves to do it. The group that was in Korea move into Manchuria, and the civilian government in Japan really didn't approve of what they were doing. And so, but there doesn't seem to be any strong mechanism to really kind of control what the military is doing here. In the West, simply with this Manchuria incident here, the West really didn't know how to go about dealing with this issue. And Japan is going to leave the League of Nations in a few years after this incident. But what you have here is this idea of a co-prosperity sphere, something I had mentioned at the beginning here. Prince Kone had this idea, and he floated this idea out there in the 1930s, where there's this need to push out the Western powers, and Japan just moves in and becomes kind of the custodian of the area. And Prince Kone does become very influential in the government by 1940. So this is going to be one of these big, he's going to be one of these leaders that is going to help really move Japan towards war. So with some political factors here, ultimately here, oh, got a little excited. Japan emerges as a world power, and we could say that by the beginning of the 20th century, especially after they successfully took on Russia in the Russo-Japanese War, and then World War I. They do emerge as a power, and they want the respect of a world power, and they want to be able to sit at the table like other world powers, but they're not getting the respect. When we look at the dynamics of the politics in Japan, the military is going to have a heavy influence in the government. There's just simply going to be a lack of checks and balances in the government. We have checks and balances in our government. The Japanese government is going to be really lacking those checks and balances in there. So the military is going to be able to have a greater influence here. And like I stated earlier, some of the military leaders, the old samurais, they'll find themselves in bureaucratic positions as well. Japan had plans for political development of an independent Asia, free from colonialism with their protection. Again, we'll call that the co-prosperity sphere. They're going to build on this anti-Western views, create a sphere of influence very similar to, the United States' view of the Americas, that this is going to be our area of influence. For Japan, that's going to be their area of influence, as you can see on this map here. And then the conquered territories, at first, they looked at the Japanese as kind of as liberators, but then Japan just quickly moves in and begins to exploit and oppress those that are living in the conquered areas. And in many ways, they become like slave laborers, which does come out during the war. So Japan's path to war is going to be a little different than that of Germany's. If we go to the beginning of the 20th century here, and we look at really the Russo-Japanese War and how Japan perhaps was treated during the peace process. Even though they succeeded, they didn't feel like it was a complete victory here for them, and they got everything they were looking for. And then the First World War, and they looked at it as a mutilated victory. Again, they did not get what they felt they deserved, maybe because of race, and that could also go back to looking at the 21 Demands and Lansing's Ishii Agreement. You will find that Japan does not feel like it is being properly treated on the international scene like other nations, mainly because it's an Asian country, and so race is being thrown out there. The Washington conferences are all dealing with about the size of militaries, the navies, and this is an era of disarmament, and Japan somehow is not treated in the formulas like the United States and some of the European powers are. The Manchurian Incident I had mentioned in 1931. Japan leaves in 1933. We studied a little bit of the Sino-Japanese War with the Chinese Civil War. So that really is about 1937. So the Second World War is really beginning in Asia Pacific. And then the attack on Pearl Harbor in 1941. That brings in the United States now. And so Japan is at war. It, as we know, will be a very difficult war for Japan. All right. Any questions on that? So that's a little bit of the path to the Second World War, the outbreak of the Second World War in Europe and in the Asia Pacific area. Any questions, anything that needs to get clarified? Okay. Now, I'm not certain that Schoology is working here, but one of the last things I want to focus on here is the total war activity. Something I was going to introduce on Friday, but because of our shift in our model, and they decided to give Friday a PD day for us teachers to help in that transition, I wouldn't be able to introduce it. So I will do that now. Let's see here. All right, there we go. So this total war activity, you can try downloading it from Schoology. I don't know if you're able to. and again, if someone just either unmutes and say they can't, or if put it in the chat, you can't, you do want to make sure that you do get this activity, maybe get a start, figure out who your historical buddies are. Again, it is very similar to the one we did with the First World War. We're going to do the same with the Second World War. We're going to look for the same type of thing here. In what ways can World War II be considered a total war? This one, it might be a little bit more easier to make a case, because considering the scope and the scale and who's involved in it, everything seems to be kicked up some notches in the Second World War. But I think one thing that we're really looking at here is the technology in this war going to have a bigger influence on the outcome than in the First World War? All right, so that's something to think about as you're going through here. Again, the three main points that you need to be focusing on is the theaters of war, how it's being fought. In this case, it's not always in Europe. We have to go into the Pacific and see what's happening there as well. So if we're looking at the war at sea or the war in air, war on land, not only in Europe, but also got to be mentioning something with what's happening in the Pacific, or even in North Africa. Cannot forget about the North African campaigns. The role of civilians in this one, there are some apparent acts of genocide. This is the Holocaust as well. But atrocities are occurring on both sides, not just by the Axis powers, but also by the Allied powers. Okay, in the Second World War, some like to spotlight the United States and the Japanese internment that was going on. Deportations, I guess that could fit into that as well. But in the Soviet Union, Joseph Stalin is going to utilize this time as to move around some ethnic minority groups as well. But then also the use of slave labor is going to occur. The growth of government, and here I only want you to pick two of them. So you've got Britain, Germany, Soviet Union, Japan, the United States. Maybe you pick an Allied power and an Axis power. And you could probably find a good comparison between those two. So maybe Britain and Germany, or the Soviet Union and Japan, or the United States, whatever combination you come up with. Okay, but you just need to pick two of those nations. I think the differences here, we have personal letters or diary entries about the war. So this has been added in, creating a storyboard or political cartoons. All right, in all these cases, visuals are needed. Okay, so like the social media, cereal box, personal letters, storyboard, political cartoons, voice is not needed there, only if you're doing that first part here with like a podcast is what we're looking at. Okay, so that will be due next week. All right. And so that would be due February 16th. Okay. Threw a lot at you, but not as much as yesterday. All right. Is there anything, I can't think of anything that I might have forgotten, but is there anything that is on your mind that I need to discuss?
The assignment that we worked on yesterday, that's due today.
Yeah, that is due tomorrow, actually. But what I want you with that is you should be, good point, is looking at part B. Should be, so in my mind, and again, I live in a different type of mindset. After yesterday, you went back and you completed the first part. Now today, you should complete the second part. And so all you really might need to do is the third part for Friday, and that's the part C, which is the summary questions. And the second question here is looking at to what extent was Japan responsible for the outbreak of the war in the Pacific? So that really is looking at all these events here. And I have a couple examples here. Excuse me, I have an example, the Russo-Japanese War. And you determine whether it's a major or minor. But after looking at all those, assess, is Japan really responsible for the outbreak of the war? Or again, is someone else responsible? So you're engaging in historiography. In both these questions, you're engaging in what we call historiography. All right, so this is your first task. Get this done for tomorrow. The assignment that I had mentioned, this one, that was opening up for tomorrow. And then that will be due, actually, even though it says here Tuesday, February 16th, it's actually due Wednesday, February 17th. Okay. All right. Anyone else have any questions? It is so weird that we've only had 2 days this week, and then we got a day off tomorrow, and we got a day off on Monday. Monday is President's Day, and it's probably not the best transition, but this week we do have an impeachment trial going on, and so probably is going to get wrapped up this week, and perhaps next week we'll know if President Donald Trump will be convicted or not. So if anything, maybe take some time to read about the impeachment trial or watch the impeachment proceedings on TV. It is a historical event. The only time a president has been impeached 2 times. And so it's part of our political process. We don't use it often, but here is an opportunity to see it in action. We've learned a lot about our political process since Election Day. All right. Anyone have any thoughts before we go? All right, well, I will leave this Google Meet open and answer any questions or concerns. If you don't have any, you can exit and have a great day and weekend.